Welcome to King on Kings. This week, our guest is Hezekiah.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You have one of the more interesting reigns as king.
I know how this works, and it's not going to work on me.
What do you mean?
You want to point out all my accomplishments, but more importantly, you want to point out all my failures. Isn't that right?
We just want to hear the truth.
Let's get started. I got things to do.
Well, okay, let's see. You tore down the places where people worshipped idols.
Yes, sir.
Saved people from invading forces. By prayer alone, got a 15-year extension on life by God.
Yes, sir.
Man, I could use that.
Probably not going to happen, Larry.
I've got to say, you look pretty squeaky clean.
I told you, I'm pretty much a boss like that.
So what happened after your death?
I don't know, Mr. King. I was dead.
Well, let me tell you what happened. Your son Manasseh became king.
Oh, man. Not Manasseh.
Yes, Manasseh.
Oh, man.
Manasseh did more evil than the godless, idol-worshipping nations around him combined.
That's just freaking awesome.
He led people astray and into rebellion against God.
I told his mother we should have put him in a private school.
So after all the good things you did, all the reforms you implemented, you handed it over to your son, and he flushed it down the toilet. Next week, we get ready to celebrate Christmas. We interview the last king of Israel, King Hezekiah.
All right, good morning. Welcome to Life Bridge. My name is Grant, if we haven't met yet, not Manasseh. And today, as we go in third part of this series, we've been talking about different kings that preceded Jesus as king. Because as we celebrate Christmas, we recognize that Jesus came not to just be a savior, not to just be the Messiah, but to come to be the ultimate king of his people. And now that's why we don't have headquarters anywhere. There is no president of Christianity. There's no ruler or king. It is only Jesus that we follow. As we look at that series, what we want to do is we want to kind of compare those predecessors of Jesus before Jesus became king and what they look like. And so first week we talked about David, and the second week we talked about Jehu, and today we're talking about Hezekiah. Now Hezekiah's life and ministry can be summed up with one verse actually from the New Testament. I want to give you this verse. It simply goes like this: God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Now, don't just skip by that verse. That is key. If you came here today and you want to know a little bit more about how God works, or maybe you want to know what God does during the day, right? You ever wonder that about your parents? You go to work day, or like, what do you do during the day? Like, what does that happen? If you want to know what God does during his day, here's what he does. He wakes up, he watches the morning news, he drinks a cup of black coffee, and then he goes out and he opposes the proud, and he shows favor to the humble. That's what he does. Now, all of us kind of know what that's like, right? There was a time in my life where I could beat my children in video games. They were 2 or whatever, but they were... No, my kids, especially my boys, they're big gamers and stuff like that. But when they were little, I could actually beat them in video games, and it was fantastic. Especially when it came to Madden football, right? So they get on there, and they have no idea what the formations are and what the play calls are and stuff like that. They're just like picking different stuff. So I would go, and because I'm a loving father, I would only really pummel them if they were cocky, right? So if they scored a touchdown on their play and they were like, yeah, you know, whatever, they were arrogant, because I'm like God, right? I would oppose their pride, and I would just blitz every single play, right? And they just, like, to the point where they were like, I don't want to play Madden anymore. And I'm like, oh, just keep playing. And because they were, like, crushed inwardly, which is that spot you really want to get to as a father, because they were crushed and they were humble, right, what did I do? I kind of let them drive down the field and score a touchdown. I kept things even. Now, a couple of years later, that got to the point where I couldn't actually beat them no matter how hard I tried. So frustrating. I actually spent some time while my kid was at school. Elijah went to school one day, and he had just beat me in every game, and I was really trying. I didn't let him know that. I kind of let him think, I was letting him win. He goes to school, and I'm like, all right, I got to figure out this Z formation thing. I sit down, so I practiced. I did drills and everything, and anyway, he continued to humble me, and I don't think I've beat him in a game since. So we all have that inside of us. God opposes the proud, gives grace to the humble. That's what God does. In Hezekiah's life, you get to see that in profound ways. Hezekiah starts off his life as the son of one of the biggest evil kings in Israel's history, in Judah's history. His dad was King Ahaz. He promoted worshiping God in the wrong way. So as king, he came in and he said, hey, God wants you to worship in the temple in Jerusalem. Back in the Old Testament, God was pretty simple. Hey, I want you to worship me, and when you worship me, if you worship me, I want you to worship me in the temple in Jerusalem. But the people came along and said, well, it seems like it would be better if we were up higher. So they went up to the high places, and they would worship God in the high places, and they would build these Asherah poles, and they would say, hey, isn't it better to worship God up higher? It's like we're closer to Him, right? And God's just doing, the face palm thing. He's like, how hard can this be? I just want you to worship here. And so the king, Ahaz, he would encourage people to build these altars and worship people at the high places, and he encouraged people to worship other gods besides the God. In fact, this is Hezekiah's dad. Ahaz took one of Hezekiah's brothers and sacrificed him in a fire to a false god so that he could worship that god. This is Hezekiah's dad. And sometimes the best kings produce the worst kids. And sometimes the worst kings produce the best kids. And Hezekiah, having watched his dad sacrifice one of his children, having watched his dad lead people astray, lead people away from God, Hezekiah was a good king. After being raised like this is what it says about Hezekiah. 2 Kings chapter 18. Hezekiah, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. So in other words, they kind of skipped by Ahaz and all the predecessors, and they were like, we're just going to pretend like those aren't his fathers. Let's go all the way back to David. He removed the high places. He smashed the sacred stones and cut down the Asherah poles. In other words, he came along, and in everything that his dad did, he came and he undid. He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made, for up to that time the Israelites had been burning incense to it. It was called the Nehushtan. Verse 5. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord. Now listen, the Bible doesn't give compliments like this very often, so pay attention. He trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. He held fast to the Lord and did not stop following him. He kept the commands of the Lord had given Moses. And the Lord, because of that, the Lord was with him. He was successful in whatever he undertook. So Hezekiah's got some pretty, if you're handing out a resume and you're one of the kings of Judah, you've got that on your list. You're like, hey, that's a pretty big stamp of approval right there from God. So he starts to feel good, and he's leading the people back to God. And he decides that he's going to throw off the yoke of the Assyrian kings. So here's what's happened to Israel, to Judah. God has come in, and he is continually enslaving his people. Right? So yesterday my wife and I saw the Exodus movie with Batman, and it was actually started off really good, but honestly I'd say it's like $1 movie if you haven't seen it yet. It's like every time there was a moment for like something to be cool or awesome, it was like they missed it. It was like, no, that was... Anyway, so that we saw that. We all know that story, right? God leads his people out from Israel, and he leads them outside of slavery, and we all think, yeah, they're done with slavery. Actually, no. They knew slavery a lot after that because they would continue to sin and rebel against God. And so God would send these other nations and these powerful armies. And when they would lead themselves astray from God, he would come in with these other countries and he would enslave them again. When Hezekiah becomes king, because of his father and because of other kings, they're in a place where Assyria is got their thumb down on top of them. Right? They're just under their yoke. And they're letting them exist, but as long as they pay taxes and pay homage and basically do everything that the Assyrian power wants them to. So Hezekiah comes to power, and things are going good, and everything he touches, God blesses. And so he says, you know what? I'm done with Assyria. I'm not going to do what the most powerful nation in the world at the time wants me to do. I am going to rebel against the king of Assyria. So he rebels for 14 years against the king of Assyria. And finally, it gets to a point where the king is like, this isn't going to work. I'm going to go against this nation, the king of Assyria, a guy by the name of Sennacherib. If you're thinking about names for your kids, that's one. Sennacherib, he comes in there and he takes his entire army up against him. And he's like, okay, your little rebellion, it is over. We're going to squelch this. So he surrounds the city. He surrounds the walls. He comes up against him with his army. And so Hezekiah's like, oh no, I don't know what to do. Let's take everything we have. Let's take the treasury from the temple. Let's strip off the silver. Let's strip off the gold. And they put it all in a big cart, and they send it out to the king. And they're like, hey, just leave us alone. Here is every last bit of our wealth. But that didn't work, because the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, was one of the most arrogant people that ever existed on planet Earth. And you'll pick it up as we read the story. But if you actually go into the Assyrian records, the things that Sennacherib actually wrote down in history, you will see how incredibly arrogant he was. I mean, it's just amazing how he could walk into a town. And when he would conquer a city, he would say things like, and because of my might and my strength and my macho good looks. He didn't say that, but he would just, that's the record that he would record down. Extremely arrogant. This is what he says. After Hezekiah sends these gifts, all the silver and gold of the city, this is what Sennacherib sent his field commander to say to Hezekiah. They go up to the wall. All the people of Jerusalem are on the wall. They walk up and they begin to yell out this message. It says, tell Hezekiah, this is what the great king, the king of Assyria, says. On what are you basing this confidence of yours? In other words, he's like, why do you think you can... You're just this small-time king of this small army, and there's just no way you could beat me. What is this confidence? You say you have the counsel and the might for war, but you speak only empty words. On whom are you depending that you rebel against me? Look, I know where you think you're getting your confidence. You're depending on Egypt. That splintered, listen to this explanation, this is actually pretty good. That splintered reed of a staff, which pierces the hand if anyone tries to lean on it. Anybody ever have a friend like that? Thought that was a pretty good description. Anyway, such is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who depend on him. But if you say to me, we are depending on the Lord our God, isn't he the one whose high places and altars Hezekiah removed, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before this altar in Jerusalem? Now, don't you hate it when somebody's talking trash or smack talking with you and they don't even know what they're talking about? Doesn't that, I mean, it's one thing if they know what they're talking about, but if they're just making up stupid stuff, right? He doesn't even realize that Hezekiah's done a good thing, that he's actually brought reform and led people back to the obedience. He thinks this is a bad thing. But what is he doing? He's causing the people on the wall, the people that are hearing him, causing them to question what God is doing. Verse 23. Come now, make a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. And this is where he just gets arrogant. He says, I will give you 2,000 horses if you could put riders on them. Right? Let's even the playing field a little bit. Give you 2,000 horses. You guys, if you can find guys to put on them, I'll give you a chance. How can you repulse one officer of the least of my master's officials? even though you were depending on Egypt for chariots and horsemen. Now you got to understand, at this point, we don't have any reason to believe that Hezekiah has had any correspondence with Egypt. But the king of Assyria is just looking and going, there's got to be some reason. He's got to have some game plan here. But the truth is, Hezekiah and I think, have a lot in common. We don't have a game plan, right? Game plans are for people that think ahead and put things on their calendar and schedule things. I don't think Hezekiah has any kind of game plan here. Verse 25, furthermore, have I come to attack and destroy this place without word from the Lord? The Lord himself told me to march against this country and destroy it. And so the people on the wall and the people that are following after Hezekiah and the people of God are beginning to question, wow, is God with us? Did God really tell Sennacherib to march against us? Should we have not removed the high places? Is Hezekiah a complete march? So they don't know. They're just like, wow. And so they're all unnerved. Next line. Then Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, and Shebna, and Joah, and a bunch of other guys that I can't pronounce their name, said to the field commander, please speak to your servants in Aramaic, since we understand it. Don't speak to us in Hebrew in the people in hearing on the wall. So in other words, hey, speak to us in Aramaic. All these the common folk, the soldiers, you're going to freak them out. Don't freak them out. Just speak to us in Aramaic. And then he responds, check this out. But the commander replied, was it only to your master and you that my master sent me to say these things, and not to the people sitting on the wall, who, like you, will have to eat their own excrement and drink their own urine? Right? So you can see the pride that's happening. It's not particularly clever, right? Kind of sounds like a second or third grade kid having a fight with another one. Like, oh yeah, well I'm gonna beat you. I'm gonna beat you, and then I'm gonna make you eat your own poop. Right? That's kind of what it sounds like. But anyway, they're talking smack back and forth, and they're just absolutely 100% totally confident that they got this. The city of Jerusalem, Hezekiah, they're nothing compared to the might of the Assyrian kingdom. And then they go one step farther. At the wall, they begin to curse their God. And they begin to say, listen, you think your God's going to save you. It's just a joke. And then they begin to list all the other cities and nations and countries and people they've conquered. And they said, did God save these people? Did the God of these people save them? Did the God of this city save them? Did the God of these people save them? And list them one right after the other. Until the point where these people are just, the people inside the walls of Jerusalem are freaking out, and they're like, man, we should give up, we should surrender, we should walk away. God's told him to do this, we're not going to be able to do it, and God's not going to be able to save us. And then they come back to Hezekiah, and they tell him everything that has just been said. And Hezekiah doesn't know what to do. He doesn't have a move. You ever been in a spot like that? Where you just don't have a move. It's not like there's two options. I want to know what the wisest one is. It's like there's no options and I got no place to turn. How many people have ever been in a spot like that? Go ahead and raise your hand. You been in a spot like that? Well, you're going to be if you haven't been one already. So you get in a spot like that where there just is no option. And Hezekiah does something very, very unique. He, as the king, here's this information, and the people are like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And Hezekiah's like, I'm going to go to the temple, and I'm going to lay on my face, and I'm going to ask God to save us. Now, it doesn't say what anybody else says, right? That they're like, okay, yeah, that's great. After you do that, could you come back with a plan, right? I'll tell you what, that's exactly what Hezekiah does. He walks into the temple. He has nowhere left to turn. He lays on his face. And the prayer that he prays at this point isn't particularly eloquent. It's not particularly long. Sometimes we get caught up on the words that we're saying when we're praying. That's not the point. But Hezekiah's prayer was in complete humility. What's that verse from James 4? God opposes the proud, but he shows favor to the humble. Now, I want to kind of take a time out in the story, and I want to just ask you that one question. What do you do in situations like that? I got to tell you, a lot of times people come and they want counsel from me because I'm up here and I must sound kind of smart, so they figure I have smart things to say, and they find out that's not usually the case. Anyway, so come up to me and they'll be like, hey, I got this situation. And the situations usually vary a lot. It's like, I'm going to lose my job this week. I'm going to lose my house this week. I found out my son has a hole in his heart. I'm going to, whatever it is. It's big and it's heavy. And they come to me and they're like, so what do we do? And I usually say something like, well, you've got to put your trust in God. And I always kind of get this response, and it's not everybody, but a lot of times I get this response like, oh, yeah, we prayed. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not talking about like praying, because praying's like some words that you say and how you say them and stuff like that. I'm not talking about checking a prayer off your list. I'm talking about putting your faith, your trust, I'm talking about putting all of your chips on God. I'm talking about closing your office door and getting on your face. I'm talking about giving up on any of your strategies and completely melting before God. Because that's the only thing you can do right now. That's the only thing that's going to work. Because why? Because God opposes the proud. But if you are humble, God shows favor to the humble. Am I promising you that God's going to like fix your situation? No. I'm saying the only thing that you can do right now is humble yourself before God. That's exactly what Hezekiah does. He completely humbles himself while everybody's asking him what are we going to do? The king's outside. He's getting ready to just completely mow them down. Verse 35. That night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. Bye, Felicia. A couple of you got that. He returned to Nineveh and stayed there. Sennacherib leaves. He's completely beat. He walks away, runs away. God just completely delivers the nation of Israel. And then he runs home. And then a little while later, his sons, while he's in his temple worshiping his God, sneak up behind him and they kill him. And the might and the greatness of the king of Assyria is just wiped out. Why? Because God opposes the proud, but he shows favor to the humble. Now, that's our situation in life, and I'm just more and more convinced that that's all we've really got to do. If you wake up and try to figure out what you're supposed to do in your life, don't be proud, be humble, and try to figure out what that means, because God shows that favor to the humble. And you would think after all of this that Hezekiah has witnessed, that Hezekiah would be able to look at this and go, wow, I will never be arrogant like Sennacherib. I will never, in my kingdom will look nothing like the king of Assyria. But that's not the case. In fact, there's this little couple of lines that we find in 2 Chronicles. It goes like this. 2 Chronicles chapter 32, talking about Hezekiah. He succeeded in everything he undertook. Now, I just want to pause there. That may not describe you. You may not write that down and say, yeah, I've succeeded in everything that I've ever done, right? That may not describe you, and there actually may be a reason to that. What if you succeeded in everything that you did? What would you become? Would you become arrogant? Would you become prideful? Who does God oppose and who does it give favor to? Anyway, he says he succeeded in everything he undertook, but when envoys were sent by the rulers of Babylon, so you got two nations right now. You got Assyria, who's just been dealt a serious wound, 185,000 soldiers dead, and the Sennacherib's dead, and you've got Babylon, which they're the other big player, right? They're the other big powerful nation. Envoys from Babylon, so they're a long ways off, show up at Jerusalem one day to ask about the miraculous sign. To ask about these 185,000 dead troops. They come to ask about this miraculous sign that had occurred in the land. Now look at this line. So important. God left him to test him and to know everything that was in his heart. God left Hezekiah. What does that mean? Well, he just backed away. He's like, hey, I want to see what it's like if I'm not sending you my prophet Isaiah every 5 minutes to tell you something. I want to know what it's like if I don't come into your life with the Holy Spirit and make decisions for you and constantly working you and constantly convicting you. I'm just going to step away and see what you do if I leave you alone for just a second, because I want to know what's in your heart. Now, we as parents know what that's like, right? Which one of us has ever, getting the opportunity to see our kids without them knowing that we're around, won't take that opportunity, right? It's easy when they're little. It's kind of creepy when they're older and you're sneaking up on them and stuff. But when they're little, you can kind of walk by. I've actually gotten down on my hands and knees and crawled up the stairs very quietly. Anybody else done this? Laid down on the floor and peeked around the corner to see what my little girl was doing, right? Or what she was saying, or because you hear those fights and all you do is hear the end result, but you want to see what's in their heart, right? So you come around the corner. I want to know what they're doing when they don't think that I'm around. That's the spot, and that's what God wants. God's like, hey, Hezekiah, you've led through a lot and accomplished a lot. Let's have a look at what's really in your heart. So these envoys come and they're like, hey, we've heard a great sign, heard a great thing. Oh, Hezekiah, we've heard you're a great king. Can we have a look around? And this is what happened. 2 Kings, chapter 20. Hezekiah has them take a look around. He's like, oh, okay, sure. Let me show you the treasury. Let me show you my military. Let me show you how many chariots, how many horses we have. And he walks them around. I went to visit a pastor one time, and I was just there for counsel, kind of a bigger church. I was just there to talk with him, do lunch with him and stuff. So I show up one day, and he was like, oh, hey, good to meet you. Well, come with me. And he starts showing me the church. Takes me into the auditorium, and he didn't have keys, so he had to get another staff member. He opens it, and he says, shows the auditorium, and he takes me over to the children's ministry, and shows me the children's ministry. And about halfway through this tour, he turns to me and he says, you didn't ask me to take you on a tour, did you? And I was like, no, but it's fun. It's great to be here. And he's just showing me around this place because this is something that he's accomplished and he's done, and that's exactly what Hezekiah is doing. He's like, yeah, God's blessed me, and I've got this pile of money over here, and I've got these soldiers, and I've got these chariots, and I've got these horsemen, and he was full. As soon as God left him to see what in his heart, he just became full of pride, and he put his people at risk by showing his enemy everything that he was about. Verse 20. Or chapter 20, verse 14. Then Isaiah the prophet went to King Hezekiah and asked, what did those men say, and where did they come from? Oh, from a distant land, Hezekiah replied. They came from Babylon. The prophet asked, what did they say? What did they see in your palace? They saw everything in my palace, Hezekiah said. There is nothing among my treasure that I did not show them. I just would love to catch the look on Isaiah's face. You did what now? You showed spies from Babylon everything. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your predecessors have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. And Hezekiah, as humble as he was in comparison to Sennacherib, and as humble as he was in comparison to his father, he still had that immense pride in his heart. And I want to encourage you to just look at this in your life. Just to ask yourself the question, because we spend a lot of time identifying Sennacheribs, right? We spend a lot of times trying to figure out the people in the media and the news and the friends in our life. We spend a lot of time looking at other people's arrogance and pride and how bad they are and how much they've stored up in their heart. And I just want to challenge you to do this. Just look in your own heart and notice what's inside there. Take a good look inside there. And I just challenge you to do this. Weigh the motivation of every thought that you have. Everything that you think. Why am I doing this? Is this to bring glory to myself? Is this to make me look good? Is this because I was insecure? Is this because my mommy never really hugged me? What is the motivation behind everything I do? And I promise you, you will look into your heart and you will find that you are filled with pride. And God, because He cares for you and because He loves you, is going to oppose that pride. But if we are humble, if we learn the meaning of humility, then He will show us favor. Let me pray for you.